I was so angry to God, even to the point that I rejected Him in that season ng buhay ko. I hated Him so much for all the things that happened in my life. Have you ever felt anger to God? You can't admit fearing that you are sinning against God. So ito yung pag-uusapan natin this episode, which is anger towards God as a continuation from last episode. Hi beloved, this is Doc Gilbert and I am a Christian clinical psychologist and counselor. Very sensitive nung topic natin and uh, maraming beses that I've heard from trauma survivors and victims, asking where is God during the traumatic event in their lives. So, where was God when this abuse is happening? And, it brought a lot of fear, that God does not care, hurt, shame that I'm not that valuable or important to God, and ultimately, yung galit or anger towards God. And yes, if we have a God who is sovereign, who is almighty, all powerful, then why did he allow to do it? Or why did he allow it to happen in the survivor's life? If in one word, one snap, he can do all things and just save and rescue, thousands and multiple survivors of trauma. And also, it's easy to answer, just give a Bible verses, give an advice, forgive the abusers, be Christ-like, at the face of trauma event like this, But there is no an easy answer to a very difficult question. And many times, when I teach counselors, therapists, ministers, the best way to respond pa din with these questions ay empathy. We have to empathize with them that this must be so hard for them to think that God is good, God is all powerful, and this trauma, this abuse happened in their lives. And, in my own personal experience, I have a nanay, my grandmother. She was the one who took care of us for many years. She became the parent that we never had during times of abuse going on in our family. And I have many dreams for her, with her, like uh, for her to see and witness my graduation during MA, doctoral, for her to witness my wedding day with the love of my life, which is my wife today. Uh, Dreams and wishes, to spend another season, spend more time with her nung nabubuhay pa siya, no? And she got hospitalized many times due to like physical illnesses, and also all those prayers, those hopes that her life would be extended. But in a snap, she died. She died out of complication. It was during pandemic when we are experiencing lockdown. I was staying in Mandaluyong and she was at Cavite, and it shattered all of my dreams and hopes. It shattered myself, my faith, you know. How could be one of the fewest safe persons in my life could die like that? And of course, during those times, I bargained with God to extend her life, but of course, with some reasons, even up until today, that I could not understand, He did not answer it. God did not answer it. And I was so angry, so mad at Him, to the point that I rejected Him. I really avoided, turned away from Him. My intimacy with Him somehow like got lost. I felt lost. I felt so meaningless, purposeless during that time. And I was just surviving one day at a time. And of course, I was experiencing a traumatic grief, and I'm gonna discuss more of that in the next episodes. And and it affected my view of God. And of course, this loss triggered a lot of layers of losses from my own family, loss of friendships, betrayal, loss of communities, and even abandonment from God. And yeah, it was a long, enduring process. And there was a time that during my spiritual direction, uh, God said to me, and He showed me, that I could throw my strongest punch at Him. And from that time on, uh, I cried and I wept because I felt that God empathized with my anger, that He did not judge me, He did not reject me, He did not abandon nor shamed me for my anger, but actually, He has so much empathy, compassion, and mercy, and He met me with empathy. And after many months, that became a turnaround on my own personal journey with God. In dealing my anger with God, and it was difficult. It was so hard. Knowing that God, who is the ultimate safe place, my ultimate safe place, and I needed to avoid Him. I needed to run away from Him. So it was so hard. It was so difficult, and I was grieving, from the death of my nanay. And yeah, that session in spiritual direction and those months that I've honored my anger towards God paved off, it turned around, and I begin to heal. We begin to heal together, with Abba, with God, in terms of our relationship together. And I was so grateful for giving Him the grace and patience to, for me to walk through my anger towards Him. And and it paved the way as well for me to have this deepened emotional container in order to handle anger, the most powerful emotion, the strongest emotion, from counselees, from closest people who are sharing with me, but ultimately more on therapy, allowing these people to just express their anger to their parents, to their abusers, to their loved ones, and ultimately to God. And without me processing that anger, I would not be able to handle this very difficult emotion. And when we talk about anger to God, we can go to the Bible. Okay, so one of the best examples of that is the story of Job. One of those Bible heroes who've experienced a lot of suffering. We know what happened to him. He lost a lot of his properties, their cattle, their assets, their livelihood, his health, and ultimately he was also shamed for about it by his wife, his three friends, and God allowed such pain. When Satan challenged God that Job was just obedient because God was blessing him, and then God allowed it, and just gave him a limit, gave Satan a limit not to take away his life, and the suffering began during that time. And there's a lot of verses there of Job crying out of anguish, of frustration, of anger towards God. And he even said, "Why do you hide your face from me?" So it was an expression of all this disappointment, all this pain, on how God allowed this kind of tragedy to happen in his life, knowing that he has been righteous, he has been obedient to God, and it's so unfair, and that's a form of injustice. And actually, I could not imagine Job's suffering, losing a lot of important things in his life. And this anger that Job expressed, actually, uh, the counsel of his three friends was rebuked by God, because these three friends were so insensitive. They didn't know what's really happening. They did not empathize and connect to Job, and just gave a band-aid solution to a suffering, through to a traumatic event that he experienced. And Job was actually not punished in his anger. Actually, God responded to him and engaged with a dialogue. God did not said, shame on you for being so angry at me. Shame on you. You do not have to be, you do not have the right to be angry at me. But no, God also expressed his feelings, engage with conversation about his thoughts, his feelings, sharing all these ways that he created the world, and letting Job see and engaging with him, in a very authentic way. And that is God. He can be vulnerable and still feel secure, because that's him. He is not intimidated in our brokenness, in our anger towards him. And with the level of intimacy that Job has towards God, we can see that they're intimate, because God became authentic towards Job, expressing also his disappointments, his hurt, his thoughts towards Job. And Job was just honest, and God allowed him, you know, gave him this opportunity to voice that out. And God did not reject that. Okay? God honored that and listened to him. So second, we can look at the life of Jeremiah, and we know, if we read his account in the Bible, that God called him to a lot of suffering, a mission that has a lot of unfairness, injustice, people being killed, the chosen people of God. And also, I remembered when Jeremiah was submerged in a kumunoy. And he is known as the weeping prophet. And many times we can read that he complained to God because of rejection, loneliness, feeling abandoned, through all these abuses, injustice, wickedness that were happening during that time. And, he even said to God that God deceived him, in Jeremiah 27, expressing his deep frustration and emotional anguish. And, this kind of anger was actually coming from a burden from obedience, and also feeling abandoned in his calling. And that is very normal. When we witness a lot of injustice and there's no justice happening, evil is being perpetuated, victims are being neglected, not fought for, and there's no change, then anger is the only natural reaction. And Jeremiah was allowed to express his feelings. Jeremiah was so authentic towards God, and God listened to him. He did not silence Jeremiah. Third, we have Jonah. Okay, the one who was eaten by a big fish. And I know many of you are familiar with that. And, Jonah was so angry towards God because he was called by God to preach at Nineveh, a very wicked people, the very people who unalive people by skinning them, removing their flesh. And Jonah was so angry because why would God allow forgiveness to this kind of wicked and evil people? He felt injustice. He felt so frustrated. He ran away from God. That's why, he was eaten by fish. For 3 days, he stayed there. And Of course, he felt injustice, even to the point that he said, I wish that I was dead, just to express this kind of anger. 3, 2, 1, go. And his anger came from hurt, self righteousness, fairness, Well, eventually, he preached at Nineveh and many people were saved. And, it's still so hard for Jonah. And, it's also very natural. And more than anyone else, God understands that. And that's why he did not silence Jonah for expressing that kind of anger. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. And actually, the anger of our Bible heroes, these examples are proof and evidence of their intimacy with God. Many times, people, especially with their loved ones, are not expressing their anger because of the possibility of losing their attachment, losing the relationship, experiencing conflict or being shamed about it. But authenticity, meaning being real with what we feel, what our thoughts are, how do we feel towards this loved one, shows the level of intimacy that we have. And, these Bible heroes show they are intimate with God because they were able to express their anger towards God. So why is it hard to admit anger? Okay, first, there is misconception and wrong teaching in terms of theology regarding what is a sinful anger and what is not. So here it is very important that we use integration of psychology. So what is sin? I know I discussed that from previous episode that it is sinful when we cope and process anger that hurts ourselves, others, and God. If it is a toxic way, unhealthy coping mechanism, aggression, passive aggressiveness, and any form of toxic ways to deal with anger. But it is not a sin when we assert our anger, when we express it in a healthy way, in a gentle and safe manner, where we are not using attacking words to this specific person directly. We are not using physical force. And, we cope it by also writing it, releasing the energy in a healthy way, like sports, like shouting at the pillow, handling anger in a healthy manner. Okay, so it's not a sin if when we do handle our anger by healthy way, but there's a lot of misconception about that, that you're not allowed to be angry towards God. You just need to be thankful, you just need to be grateful. But when we look at the Bible, just like the examples that I gave you, intimate people with God allowed to be angry, because that's a natural reaction, second point, to an abnormal event, which is trauma, abuse, injustice. Okay? So anything that made us feel powerless, we experienced unfairness, our boundaries were crossed, we were disrespected, we were attacked, our safety was compromised, we're not feeling secure, toxic behaviors are at hand, then anger is a natural reaction. Anger is a natural reaction to an unfairness and injustice. Okay? So third, why is it others are, find it hard for them. They find it hard for them to admit anger. It's because they fear that they would be punished by God. And most of the time it is connected from attachment experiences from biological parents where feelings are not welcome inside the home. It is not talked about. Parents are not emotionally connected to the children. And most importantly, anger towards parents are not allowed, but rather it was shamed, it was judged, it was taken against them, it was weaponized. And basically, it communicates a message that you are not allowed to be angry. And many times, this anger turns inward, and it brings harm to oneself, through unhealthy coping, addiction, self harm, ideation, any behavior that could harm the well being of a person. And sometimes it turns outward, through aggression, through anger issues, through toxicity, lying, manipulation. So, either or, it's not healthy for the person to express the anger. And the person, the child at first, has suffered, from the effects of not being able to process one's anger. So, and because of that abuse and punitive style from parents inside the home, then of course, just like what I discussed, attachment experiences became our lenses on how we see God. So the same is true with God. People who grew up that their anger are not allowed and shamed would learn that they are not allowed to be authentic in their anger towards God. Okay? So these are the unacknowledged, unprocessed, unheard anger most of the time toward their parents. And it must be dealt with. So, why is it Christians feel anger towards God? So, I remember a counselee where, he experienced a lot of physical abuse, domestic violence inside the home. He was shamed, verbally attacked, day and night. Imagine the level of abuse. It's really a complex trauma. He was abandoned by the parents, and you know a lot of pain was stuck inside the body. There were a lot of unanswered prayers, unheard cries, and of course he was not rescued because he experienced those abuse for many years of his life. So yeah. And there was this session that he said, where is God during all this trauma, all this abuse that is happening in my life? And he just cried. He was in so much excruciating pain. And there is no quick answer towards that. And the reason for anger towards God, because Christian people, these specific people, have experienced a lot of unanswered prayers, not being rescued at the time of abuse and pain and loss, uh, injustices, unfairness, helplessness, and betrayal. Where is God? If He is an almighty God, a loving and caring God, why would God allow all these things? And that in itself, that kind of belief would naturally allow anger to come up. It becomes a natural reaction for that question and belief. And that's why leaders, ministers, or even counselors or psychologists should not shame this anger, should not immediately quick fix this kind of anger. Of course, if that happens, for sure, an unprocessed anger was triggered within that minister or within that therapist. But we don't need to shame that. We need to allow it to come out. because we need to remember God is not intimidated with our anger. And when we look at Jesus, he became angry too towards Abba Father, his heavenly Father, when he said, why have you forsaken me? There is anger to that. Imagine the one whom you love the most abandoned you at the most painful event of your life, which is at the cross, when he was experiencing excruciating physical pain. So why would God forsake him? So Jesus himself got angry towards God. Okay? So one must sit with anger in order to process that. I know it's not easy, it's very difficult, but we must not quick fix it. There is no shortcut. We need to let it out. So, how do we deal and process our anger towards God in a healthy way? So, first, we must acknowledge our real emotion, our anger towards God. We need to verbalize it, write it, say it out loud, let it out towards God. Remember, He desires to listen to you. He desires to process this anger with you, and He would not abandon you. And know that He is actually not intimidated with whatever emotion that we have, even against Him. Because that is God. He is the most emotionally mature and healthy person. Okay? So, we invite God to this lament truthfully, honestly. We say, God, I'm so angry towards you because you allowed these things to happen. Why did you not stop the abuse? Why did you not do anything when this trauma is happening? Why did you abandon me? Or why did it feels like you abandoned me? Where were you? We allow to express this anger and not settle for a fake peace, because we know our body could not lie. Sometime other day it would come out still. When we bury our anger. Okay, we voice it out. Okay? So second, we need also to identify the deeper cause, deeper root of this anger. Maybe the secondary emotion, because just like what we've discussed from previous episode, anger sometimes became a defense. Okay, so we need to look at the softer and deeper emotions such as sadness, grief, shame, fear. Okay, we need to look at the deeper root of what was lost. Like, what did you lose when this trauma happened? Did you lose safety, lose protection, lose, an ideal God who's supposed to rescue you during this time of abuse? So there were also losses that must be acknowledged, that you must be aware. The loss of justice, loss of those years that you could have enjoyed your life and really find yourself. So any loss that you must grieve, deeper in this anger. Okay? And third, letting you know as well that God does not cause this trauma and abuse. So part of me, as we process anger in counseling, and it was significantly processed already, I psychoeducate them with the right theology, with sound psychology, especially the verse of God work all things together for good. God allowed the evil. I discuss it to them that it's not God who allowed the evil, although Job, it's a different story, but it was the personal will and choices of the abusers. Okay, God honors our free will, even if it hurts others, even if it hurts himself. He cannot bypass our boundary. So he honors our personal choice, even if uh, it causes damage to a lot of people. And well, that's the risk. That's love, that he did not create us as robots. And it's not that God is not powerful enough to stop the abuse, but it's about respect for all of us, whether we do good or we do bad. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the ways that I help survivors as they process their anger, help them see God for who He really is. And many times, in the process, it's natural. They will realize that along the way. But part of that is I discussed this. And yes, He did not allow the evil that happened to you, but He can work all things together for good, meaning He can bring resources to turn it around and bring redemption to these parts of you, to bring healing to these parts of you. And He is working, and He will not stop working to bring healing as you say yes to Him, as you allow Him to do what only He can do in your life. He can turn around and make something beautiful out of this tragedy. Okay? So I teach them about that. I teach them about the action of evil people, of abusers, of toxic people are not the actions of God, which leads us to this, that maybe this anger as well, our anger being projected, being thrown towards God, but it's anger towards the abusers. And it's possible because it's easier to blame God, who's supposed to save us, rescue us, stop all the things that happen to us, all these evil things, rather than be angry at the very people who's supposed to love us. Like, what if the abusers are your parents, your romantic lover, your very close friends? Many times, if the parents are the abusers, it's so hard for the survivors to accept the anger, to really process and admit that. And, in the process of counseling, I help them to see that it could be projected anger to your loved ones, to their loved ones, and it must be processed. Okay? And then there is also a very important reminder that anger is a very delicate emotion, as it touches deeper trauma, complex cases, complex wounds. So it's still better if you find and seek support in a professional counseling and therapy, where you could really process this anger, this trauma in a healthy and professional way. Just like in the medical field, right? When there is an accident, we do not use band-aid. We go to the emergency room and allow the medical doctors to help us. So the same is true with this, especially with intense and long enduring anger, which is, that's already a proof that there's something complex here. There is a deeper root of trauma that must be addressed. And that's a gift. That's also God's way saying that I can turn it for good for you. And that is also His way to bring healing, to many people. And of course, you can build support, find safe people where you can express your anger, people who would not judge you, quick fix you, just give an immediate advice, but would extend empathy, support. And yeah, I hope that you'll find this kind of people, at least one, two, three, if you're lucky enough. And to be honest, it's so hard to find this kind of people these days. Okay? And then, of course, you can use the scripture if you're ready to really, make it as a way to connect to God and read the verses in a holistic way. Use prayer and guided emotional mindfulness, using the verses that God is near to you, even at your anger. that He does not reject you. You can go to Psalms, which there's a lot of expressions of anger by David and by the psalmist, So there are resources as well in the Bible that you can see that anger is a natural emotion. And in conclusion, actually, I just want to share with you that during one of my trauma processing of abuse, I remember vividly that Jesus was standing there during a memory work, and he was weeping. He was in so much pain, and he cried and cried, and it brought me in so much tears. I cried so much, feeling and knowing that God was in pain witnessing the abuse. That he has so much empathy, compassion, that yes, the abuse happened, but it did not mean that he did not care. It did not mean that he was not there. He stayed with me even if it caused so much pain in his heart. He stayed. He remained there, and he prepared the pathway for my own healing, which I'm gonna share to one of the episodes here. And yeah, that's also my message to you. In your anger towards God, know that you are not alone. In your healing, in processing your trauma, your abuse, know that Jesus was in so much pain too. It's not to give you a shortcut that you should not be angry towards God. You can express that anger to Him. At the same time, know that He is patient and He has so much compassion for you. And He will walk with you and journey with you and not give up on you. And He has prepared this healing path for you, beloved. Okay? So, I hope that you've learned a lot and know that God is not intimidated with your anger, with our anger. And if you've learned a lot from this episode, please share it to your community, share it to someone, use the link and share it to your messages and group chats, okay? At if you're new here, please subscribe and like and comment anything na gusto nyong pag-usapan natin along the way. Any topics that you want us to discuss sa upcoming episodes. Okay, and please subscribe and share this video. And by doing that, you are helping the ministry of Intimacy Philippines. Okay? So hope to see you next episode. Hanggang sa muli.